Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be. Welcome to T4S channel. My name is ZolaLuckyStar, and I'm going to be continuing with the ancient mysteries and secret societies which have influenced modern Masonic symbolism. This will be part 2, picking up where we left off. This is from a book called The Secret Teachings of All Ages, and it was written by Manly P. Hall. It is incredibly dense, in terms of the information that's contained within it. I think that it's really a must-read if people, if you're interested in the occult and so on. I think this person had a lot to say, and a lot of it I do find it really resonates for me. I'm not saying 100% of it does, but a lot of it does. And anyway, I'm reading it because you know what? It's really interesting information, and even though I may not agree with all of it, what the hell? Let's read it anyway. And we'll have some fun here together. So yeah, thanks for being here today. And let's just get right back where we left off. The so-called chair of St. Peter in Rome was believed to have been used in one of the pagan mysteries, possibly that of Mithras, in whose subterranean grottos the votaries of the Christian mysteries, my interjection, back then, there was a lot of different sects of Christianity, kind of like nowadays with Satanism here. You've got different sects, and they're very different groups, and they believe different things. Even though they're sort of all under that umbrella label of Satanism, there's very different groups. It's kind of like that. Okay. So these different groups met in the early days of their faith in Anacalypsis. Godfrey Higgins writes that in 1662, while cleaning this sacred chair of Bar Jonas, the 12 labors of Hercules were discovered upon it, and that later the French discovered upon the same chair the Mohammedan Confession of Faith written in Arabic. Initiation into the rites of Mithras, like initiation into many other ancient schools of philosophy, apparently consisted of 3 important degrees. Preparation for these degrees consisted of self-purification, the building up of the intellectual powers. My interjections, not like today, right? People have the attention span of a goldfish. I mean, look at TikTok. What is that, 2 minutes per message or something? It's kind of funny. Okay, building up the intellectual powers and the control of the animal nature. In the first degree, the candidate was given a crown upon the point of a sword and instructed in the mysteries of Mithras' hidden power. Probably he was taught that the golden crown represented his own spiritual nature, which must be objectified and unfolded before he could truly glorify Mithras. For Mithras was his own soul, standing as mediator between Ormuzd, his spirit, and Ahriman, his animal nature. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, they weren't, that distinction was not made in part 1. That puts a totally different spin on it. That's interesting. Yeah, very interesting. Okay. Mithras being his own soul, which is standing as a mediator between his spirit, which they're calling Ormuzd, and Ahriman, his animal nature. In the second degree, he was given the armor of intelligence and purity and sent into the darkness of subterranean pits to fight the beasts of lust, passion, and degeneracy. My interjection's not like today, where all of that stuff is glorified, center stage, and they're forcing it on children, trying to sexualize them. Oh, okay, I'm off on a tangent. Okay. Continuing, in the third degree, he was given a cape upon which were drawn or woven the signs of the zodiac and other astronomical symbols. After his initiations were over, he was hailed as one who had risen from the dead, was instructed in the secret teachings of the Persian mystics, and became a full-fledged member of the order. Well, there's seems to me they're skipping a thing here, which is that apparently one of the last tests that you got to go through is they're going to drop you off in the open sea in a little boat And if you live, then you get to be a full-fledged member. It's interesting that they're saying that this once the initiations are over, he's hailed as one who'd risen from the dead, because really, it is kind of interesting. And now I'm thinking about my own work as a dream yogin, which I did for over 10 years. And what I found is that, there's so many sleepers out there, and even when you see them in the dream time, they're still sleeping. They don't even realize, they don't even know who they are or where they are. They're just in this kind of a loop where it's just like, get up, go to work, come home. And they're basically kind of, in a way, spiritually dead. So, once you go out and you're seeking that spiritual gold and you're trying to advance yourself spiritually and you're working on that kind of stuff, once you learn about the mysteries and you become more aware and your third eye's open and all that stuff, it's almost as if you do rise from the dead. So I just think that's really interesting choice of words there. Continuing. Candidates who successfully passed the Mithraic initiations were called lions and were marked upon their foreheads with the Egyptian cross. Mithras himself is often pictured with the head of a lion and 2 pairs of wings. My interjection, well, that's kind of interesting. I mean, they've got, the Sphinx, right, which is the body of a lion and the head of a man. So, interesting. Throughout the entire ritual were repeated references to the birth of Mithras as the sun god. So if they're saying that, think about that, right? They're saying that Mithras is the human being's soul. And here, you see, they're saying that the birth of Mithras, or that Mithras, the human being's soul, is the sun god. Right? Very interesting. So, the one true sun is really found within. That's what I get from that. Anyways, so his sacrifice for man, it says here, his death that man might have eternal life, and lastly his resurrection and the saving of all humanity by his intercession before the throne of Ormuzd. And remember, Ormuzd is his spirit. Well, the cult of Mithras. There's something else that kind of pops into my mind here, right? And they're talking about, his sacrifice for man and his death that men might have eternal life, and lastly his resurrection, and thereby the saving of all humanity. There is something interesting about that in the sense that, Satan has said that the purpose of life and existence is to advance yourself and make yourself better, and thereby you advance the rest of the universe as well, right? Because in a sense, if we're all connected, the advancement of one person advances everybody, right? And so in a sense, if you're advancing yourself and you've arisen spiritually as if from the dead, you are actually, in a way, it's like a sacrifice, but yeah, you help to save the rest of humanity. Anyway, let's see, we'll continue here. You guys are just going to have to get used to me interjecting. I just can't help it. Okay. While the cult of Mithras did not reach the philosophic heights attained by Zarathustra, its effect upon the civilization of the Western world was far-reaching, for at one time, nearly all Europe was converted to its doctrines. Here, if that's so, then I guess it would kind of make sense that it would be real easy for these people, to then turn around and kind of take that and invert it a little bit, and then force it down people's throats with fire and gibbet and sword, because you're building on something that was kind of, like, for example, these pagan holidays, they just renamed them and made them Christian, right? So you're taking something that already kind of existed in the mass mind or the consciousness of the human beings, and then you're twisting it to work for you. And I'm talking the people that forced Christianity on people, right? It's easier if it's built on something that already means something to people. So, yeah. All right. Rome, in her intercourse with other nations, inoculated them with her religious principles, and many later institutions have exhibited Mithraic culture. I mean, the reference to the lion and the grip of the lion's paw in the Master Mason's degree has a strong Mithraic tinge and may easily have originated from this cult. And I mean, look at it nowadays, right? When you look at this Christianity stuff, they're always using that lion symbology, right? For Jesus, you know, for their savior. And it's also interesting because really the lion itself is a sun symbol. So, you know, we're going back, there's layers and layers of symbology and meaning and stuff. And it's not exactly what you're thinking on the surface. Let's put it that way. Okay, a ladder of 7 rungs, 7 chakras perhaps, appears, that's me interjecting, appears in the Mithraic initiation. Faber's of the opinion that this ladder was originally a pyramid of 7 steps. Interjecting here, remember in the part 1, I think it was, they were talking about how a pyramid actually represents the star pattern, which is what the human being itself is based upon, right? You've got the head and the 4 limbs. And yeah, the pyramid with the 4 sides is the 4 limbs with the head, right? And, you know, it's really interesting when you think about it, like the capstone is actually missing. So it's like we are like the great work, and we got interrupted as we were just about to finish and put that capstone into place, which is where the third eye would actually have opened up. And instead, like that we got infiltrated, taken over, and all that kind of stuff became occult wisdom, where, you know, it's not common knowledge anymore, and, you know, people were taught to be slaves instead. So, you know, it's really interesting. It'd be very, very interesting to find out what the real true history of this earth is, because I'm telling you, what they're teaching now is not it. Like, history has been deliberately obfuscated. The more easy, therefore, to keep everybody in chains. Anyway, continuing on. It is possible that the Masonic ladder with 7 rungs had its origin in this Mithraic symbol. Okay. Women were never permitted to enter the Mithraic order, but children of the male sex were initiates long before they reached maturity. The refusal to permit women to join the Masonic order might have been based on the esoteric reason given in the secret instructions to the Mithraics. This cult is another excellent example of those secret societies whose legends are largely symbolic representations of the sun and his journey through the houses of the heavens. Mithras rising from a stone is merely the sun rising over the horizon, or, as the ancients supposed, out of the horizon at the vernal equinox. Yeah, and then you think about, you know, that the Great Pyramid was orientated towards a specific, you know, celestial constellation and blah, blah. And I mean, all this stuff is, yeah, it's very, very interesting. John O'Neill disputes the theory that Mithras was intended as a solar deity. In The Night of the Gods, he writes, "The Evsten Mithra, the Yazata of light, has 10,000 eyes high with full knowledge. Perithuvadhyana." That's a tough one to pronounce. Strong, sleepless, and ever awake. Jagharvagam. The supreme god, Ahura Mazda, also has 1 eye. Or else it's said that with his eyes, the sun, moon, and the stars, he sees everything. Well, I kind of thinks to me like that is sort of symbologically speaking about, you know, that the supreme god has 1 eye. Well, I think they're talking about the third eye. You know, it's the same. That's the same thing that you see in the pinecone court outside of the Vatican, right? That symbol, and it's on the staff that the Pope carries as well, this pinecone imagery, and that is talking about the third eye. Okay, so like, but they don't tell you that stuff. You know, the average person goes into that great big square and sees this big sculpture of a pine cone, and they're going, what the hell is that? Nobody explains it, right? It's for those who have the those who have the eyes to see can see this language of symbols that's going on all around you. And the rest are awake, the rest are asleep with their eyes wide shut, right? Supreme God Ahura Mazda has one eye, or else it's said that with his eyes, the sun, moon, and stars, he sees everything. The theory that Mithra was originally a title of the supreme heavens, God, putting the sun out of court, is the only one that answers all requirements. It will be evident that here we have origins in abundance for the Freemason's eye and its nunquam dormio. The reader must not confuse the Persian Mithra with the Vedic Mitra. According to Alexander Wilder, the Mithraic rites superseded the mysteries of Bacchus and became the foundation of the Gnostic system for which many centuries prevailed in Asia, Egypt, and even in the remote West. Okay, and then there's some notes here. So there's a picture here of Mithras slaying the bull. It says the most famous sculpturings and reliefs of this prototokos show Mithras kneeling upon the recumbent form of a great bull, into whose throat he's driving a sword. The slaying of the bull signifies that the rays of the sun, symbolized by the sword, release at the vernal equinox the vital essences of the earth, the blood of the bull, which, pouring from the wound made by the sun god, fertilizes the seeds of living things. Dogs were held sacred to the cult of Mithras, being symbolic of sincerity and trustworthiness. The Mithraics used the serpent as an image of Ahriman, the spirit of evil. Oh, there it is again, Ahriman. Oh, now it's the spirit of evil. Oh, okay. And water rats were held sacred to him. The bull is esoterically the constellation of Taurus. The serpent, its opposite in the zodiac, Scorpio. The sun, Mithras, entering into the side of the bull, slays the celestial creature and nourishes the universe with its blood. Mithras was born out of a rock which, breaking open, permitted him to emerge. This occurred in the darkness of a subterranean chamber. The Church of the Nativity at Bethlehem confirms the theory that Jesus was born in a grotto or cave. According to Dupuis, Mithras was put to death by crucifixion and rose again on the third day. Oh, goodness. The entire history of Christian and pagan Gnosticism is shrouded in the deepest mystery and obscurity. For, while the Gnostics were undoubtedly prolific writers, little of their literature survived. They brought down upon themselves the animosity of the early Christian church, and when this institution reached its position of world power, it destroyed all available records of the Gnostic cultus. The name Gnostic means wisdom or knowledge and is derived from the Greek gnosis. The members of the order claimed to be familiar with the secret doctrines of early Christianity. They interpreted the Christian mysteries according to pagan symbolism. Their secret information and philosophic tenets they concealed from the profane and taught to a small group only of especially initiated persons. And it seems like, it seems like it's always that way, and I kind of understand it on one side. I've said, hey, I have a problem with these institutions, and it's kind of arrogant that they think they're going to stand as a mediator between you and God or the gods. But it seems like also there's something to be said on the other side of the scale. It's like handing a child the secret of fire, giving them a box of matches and just saying, oh yeah, just go for it, and then the kid doesn't know what they're doing and they set the house on fire, right? I mean, I guess, you have to, it's like, you have to be like a parent in a sense, and perhaps slowly spoon feed people that don't know anything and spoon feed them information until they're adult, where they can then get on their own 2 feet and start learning for themselves, and they can go off on their own and be adults and use their reason and their logic to, delve further into mysteries and so on. But I suppose when people are starting off, they're kind of like babies, right? So I can kind of see why, you know, if you're an uninitiated or, oh, what's the word? Profane. You know, if you're a profane person, yeah, I can understand why they don't want to cast those pearls before the swine, right? Yeah. Simon Magus, the magician of New Testament fame, is often supposed to have been the founder of Gnosticism. If this be true, the sect was formed during the century after Christ and is probably the first of the many branches sprung up from the main trunk of Christianity. Everything with which the enthusiasts of the early Christian church, everything with which the enthusiasts of the early Christian church might not agree, they declared to be inspired by the devil. That Simon Magus had mysterious and supernatural powers is conceded even by his enemies, but they maintained that these powers were lent to him by the infernal spirits and furies, which they asserted were his ever-present companions. Undoubtedly the most interesting, you know, kind of makes me think of, like, you know, it's like you're just an idiot and you don't know, so what do? You know, you just call people names. Oh, you know, you're just consorting with the devil. There's nothing to that. You're just you know, name call, ethnic slur, you know, libel, ad hominem attacks, you know, because you can't think of anything really important and intelligent to say, I suppose, you know. So yeah. So they're saying, oh no, his powers were lent to him by the infernal spirits and furies, which they asserted were his ever-present companions. Well, maybe that's just an easy sort of, you know, thing to say if you don't really want to get into deeper stuff and, like, really examine, okay, what's really going on here. Anyways, I'm off on a tangent. Okay. Undoubtedly the most interesting legend concerning Simon is that which tells of his theosophic contests with the Apostle Peter while the two were promulgating their differing doctrines in Rome. According to the story that, remember, the church fathers have preserved, so, I mean, take it with a grain of salt, right? The victor gets to dictate what the actual history is, right? So you have to kind of read it with a grain of salt and, you know, try to use your own intuition and so on to try to sort of reason out for yourself what feels correct, right? Anyways, Simon was to prove his spiritual superiority by ascending to heaven in a chariot of fire. He was actually picked up and carried many feet into the air by invisible powers. Okay, you know, interject, was this technology, perhaps? You know what I mean? And primitive people wouldn't know what that is, so they would go, oh yeah, it must be demons. When St. Peter saw this, he cried out in a loud voice, ordering the demons, see? Boy, I knew that one was coming. Spirits of the air, to release their hold upon the magician. The evil spirits, of course they're evil, right? When so ordered by the great saint, oh, the great saint, were forced to obey. Simon fell a great distance and was killed, which decisively proved the superiority of the Christian powers. Yeah, oh yeah, okay. I wonder why the church fathers preserved that version of the story. Okay. This story is undoubtedly manufactured out of whole cloth. Yeah, no shit. And it is only one of many accounts concerning his death, few of which agree, as more and more evidence is being amassed to the fact that St. Peter was never in Rome. Its last possible vestige of authenticity is rapidly being dissipated. That Simon was a philosopher, there's no doubt, for wherever his exact words are preserved, his synthetic, I think they mean syntax, and transcending thoughts are beautifully expressed. The principles of Gnosticism are well described in the following verbatim statement by him, supposed to have been preserved by Hippolytus. It says, quote, "To you therefore I say what I say, and I write what I write." And the writing is thus: of the universal eons, and in brackets it says periods, planes, or cycles of created and creative life in substance and space, celestial creatures. Okay, so that's like whoever Perhaps Manly Hall himself actually interjected there. So let's just say it again without that interjection. Okay. To you, therefore, I say what I say, and I write what I write, and the writing is this. Of the universal eons there are two shoots, without beginning or end, springing from one root, which is the power indivisible, inapprehensible silence. Of these shoots, one is manifested from above, which is the great power, the universal mind ordering all things, male, and the other, from below, the great thought, female, producing all things. Hence, pairing with each other, they unite and manifest the middle distance, incomprehensible air without beginning or end. In this is the Father who sustains all things and nourishes those things which have a beginning and end. By this, we are to understand that manifestation is the result of a positive and a negative principle, one acting upon the other, and it takes place in the middle plane, or point of equilibrium, called the pleroma. This pleroma is a peculiar substance produced out of the blending of the spiritual and material eons. Out of the pleroma was individualized the demiurgus, the immortal mortal, to whom we are responsible for our physical existence and the suffering we must go through in connection with it. In the Gnostic system, three pairs of opposites called thingees emanated from the Eternal One. These, with himself, make the total of 7. I just have to interject real quick there and just say, it's interesting that it's 7, seeing as how there's 7 major chakras. Symbolism. Okay, anyway, continuing, the 6 eons were described by Simon. No, I think that this is, okay, I think we've gone past the, yeah. All right, so this is just more by Manly. The 6 3 pairs of eons, living divine principles, were described by Simon in the Philosophumena in the following manner. The first 2 were mind and thought. Then came voice. Okay, and he's got some other names in brackets, so let's try reading this again. The first 2 were mind, nous, and thought, epinoia. Then came voice, phone, and its opposite, name, onoma, and lastly reason, logismos, and reflection, enthymesis. From these primordial 6 united with the eternal flame. Now, my interjection there, that's just another name. The eternal flame is just another name for the first principle, or the source field, or there's a whole bunch of different names for this. Anyways, came forth the aeons, in brackets it says angels, who formed the lower worlds through the direction of the demiurgus. How this first Gnosticism of Simon Magus and Menander, his disciple, was amplified and frequently distorted by later adherents to the cult must now be considered. The school of Gnosticism was divided into 2 major parts, commonly called the Syrian cult and the Alexandrian cult. These schools agreed in essentials, but the latter division, so the Alexandrian cult, was more inclined to be pantheistic, while the Syrian was dualistic. So while the Syrian cult was largely Simonian, the Alexandrian school was the outgrowth of the philosophical deductions of a clever Egyptian Christian, Basilides by name, Basilides, who claimed to have received his instructions from the Apostle Matthew. Does this get confusing or what? Like Simon Magus, he was a emanationist with Neoplatonic inclinations. In fact, the entire Gnostic mystery is based upon the hypothesis of emanations as being the logical connection between the irreconcilable opposites, absolute spirit and absolute substance, which the Gnostics believed to have been coexistent in eternity. Some assert that Basilides was the true founder of Gnosticism, but there's much evidence to the effect that Simon Magus laid down its fundamental principles in the preceding century. The Alexandrian Basilides inculcated Egyptian Hermeticism, Oriental occultism, Chaldean astrology, and Persian philosophy in his followers, and in his doctrines sought to unite the schools of early Christianity with the ancient pagan mysteries. To him is attributed the formulation of that peculiar concept of the deity which carries the name of Abraxas. In discussing the original meaning of this word, Godfrey Higgins in his Celtic Druids has demonstrated that the numerological powers of the letters forming the word Abraxas, when added together, result in the sum of 365. Same author also notes that the name Mithras, when treated in a similar manner, has the same numerical value. So, and again, what did they say here earlier on? Let me go back. They were saying that, they were talking about that the concept of the deity that carries the name of Abraxas was the human's own soul, and his spirit they called Ormuz, and his animal nature was Arium. And I just think that that's really interesting. And then they're talking about this, excuse me, number 365, which is the same as the days of the year. If I'm not mistaken, I seem to recall reading somewhere else, this is just off the top of my head, I could be wrong, but that the number of bones or something in the human body is also 365. Now, I'm going to have to check that because I'm not sure. Let me just pause this for a second and I'll go check. Okay, yeah, no, it was the Basilidians. They referred to 365 as the number of parts, or mele, in the human body. So not bones, but parts. Anyway, let's see, we're going to go back to the text now. The same author also notes that the name Mithras, when treated in a similar manner, has the same numerical value. Basilides taught that the powers of the universe were divided into 365 eons, or spiritual cycles, and that the sum of all of these together was the Supreme Father. And to him he gave the Kabbalistical appellation Abraxas as being symbolical numerologically of his divine powers, attributes, and emanations. Abraxas is usually symbolized as a composite creature with the body of a human being. That's that 5-pointed star. Head of a rooster, each of his legs ending in a serpent. C.W. King and his Gnostics and their remains. You got to realize that that's all symbolic. And his Gnostics and their remains gives the following concise description of the Gnostic philosophy of Basilides, quoting from the writings of the early Christian bishop and martyr Saint Irenaeus. He asserted that God, the uncreated eternal Father. So I think that that's just another way of trying to express the idea of the first principle. Okay, had first brought forth nous, or mind. Okay, and this is the logos, word. So the source field, the 0-point energy field, that first principle, what they're calling, and it is uncreated in the sense that it's coming from eternity, and it's neither, well, it's non-physical, right? But it is the force from which the universe that we understand, like physical things, springs from that. So they're calling it uncreated because, yeah, it's not physical. And they're calling it Eternal Father because in the sense that it's giving rise to, it is fathering all these different physical things. All right, so anyway, and that the first thing that it brought forth was nous, or mind, right? Because everything proceeds from thought first, right? Like intelligence. And whatever else this field is, it contains blueprints of basically anything and everything. And that exists in the physical universe, I suppose, but it begins with a thought. Everything begins with a thought, and then it moves up through the astral, and eventually arrives at the physical. And that's the logos, the mind, the word, right? Thoughts produce words. Anyways, I'm just kind of reasoning through this as I'm reading it. All right, so this again, phronesis, intelligence. Okay, from phronesis, intelligence, springs Sophia, wisdom, and dynamis, strength. In describing Abraxas, C.W. King says Bellarmine considers the composite image inscribed with the actual name Abraxas to be a Gnostic pantheos, representing the supreme being. And again, that would be the first principle, with the 5 emanations marked out by appropriate symbols. From the human body, which is the usual form assigned to the deity, spring the 2 supporters. That would be the legs, nous and logos. So nous was mind, and logos, word, expressed in the serpents, symbols of the inner senses, and the quickening understanding. So there it is about, the serpent being wise, right? On which account the Greeks made the serpent the attribute of Pallas, Pallas. His head, that of a cock, represents phronesis, that bird being the emblem of foresight and of vigilance. His 2 arms hold the symbols of Sophia, and again, Sophia is wisdom, and dynamis, strength. So you've got the shield of wisdom and the whip of power. And when they say it's like a Gnostic pantheos, so I think what they're saying there is that it's kind of like a pantheon, right? So it's like a pantheon of different attributes, right? That altogether represents a supreme kind of a being. Okay. The Gnostics were divided in their opinions concerning the demi-urgus, or creator of the lower worlds. Yes, this is interesting because depending on where you're reading it, you're going to get a different conclusion. I've read a couple different conclusions on this. So we're going to go with this one. We're going to just read it. Okay. He established the terrestrial universe with the aid of 6 suns or emanations. It says in brackets here, possibly the planetary angels, which he formed out of and yet within himself. That's interesting. He formed these things out of, right? So out of that divine first principle, that 0-point energy field, which is always on the point of becoming, and that's the power that creates physical universes, right? So the physical things form out of it, and yet everything that forms out of it is also held within it. It says here, which he formed out of and yet within himself. So, you could sit and meditate on that one for a while, right? It makes me think of what we were reading earlier, where it said, everybody thinks that the soul is contained in the human body, but actually the human body is encompassed and contained by the soul. And the soul animates that body until its time is done, and then it goes on back to the first principle, and then arises again and again and again. And that the ultimate thing is to be able to, when you've put that physical body down for the last time and you go back, to be able to do so with full awareness, like full waking awareness, right? That, I believe, is what we think of as the magnum opus, because you are joining with the supreme sort of power that creates universes, and you're doing it in a conscious fashion, and it is you, and you are it. And you're in full conscious awareness of this. So, then you become like a god, right? You have the power. You have the godlike power of creation. And beings that have reached that point have the ability on their own to also create universes. So, It's very interesting stuff, and it's very deep, and you could spend, I've spent years like looking at this stuff and just going, wow, it's so deep. I love it. Okay, anyways. As stated before, the demiurgus was individualized as the lowest creation out of the substance called pleroma. One group of the Gnostics was of the opinion that the demiurgus was the cause of all misery and was an evil creature, who, by building this lower world, had separated the souls of men from truth by encasing them in mortal vehicles. I kind of disagree with that. I don't think it necessarily, but anyway, I'm going to say, not so sure about that one. The other sect viewed the demiurgus as being divinely inspired and merely fulfilling the dictates of the invisible Lord, first principle, 0-point energy field, and so on, right? Some Gnostics were of the opinion that the Jewish god Jehovah was the demiurgus. Don't know about that either. I don't think so. But at any rate, this concept under a slightly different name apparently influenced medieval Rosicrucianism, which viewed Jehovah as the Lord of the material universe rather than as the supreme deity. Mythology abounds. Oh, okay. I'm not sure I agree with that either, but at any rate. Mythology abounds with the stories of gods who partook of both celestial and terrestrial natures. Odin, it's another name for Satan, by the way. Odin of Scandinavia is a good example of a deity subject to mortality, bowing before the laws of nature, and yet being, in certain senses at least, a supreme deity. Moving on here, next paragraph. The Gnostic viewpoint concerning the Christ is well worthy of consideration. Remember, they had a lot of different sects, but at any rate, this sort of claimed to be the only sect to have actual pictures of the divine Syrian. While these were in all probability idealistic conceptions of the Savior based upon existing sculptures and paintings of the pagan sun gods, yeah, probably, they were all that Christianity had. To the Gnostics, the Christian Gnostics, the Christ was the personification of Nous, the divine mind, and emanated from the higher spiritual eons. He descended into the physical body, I guess is what they mean here, of Jesus at the baptism, and left it again before the crucifixion. The Gnostics declared, yeah, but that's if you believe that Jesus actually was a fucking human being at all that ever existed, and frankly, I don't believe it. I know, that's just me, but yeah, I don't think that he was ever a real person, never was born, never was baptized, never was crucified. That whole thing is just a big freaking fairy story. But anyway, the Gnostics declared that the Christ was not crucified, as this divine nous could not suffer death, but that Simon the Cyrenian offered his life instead, and that the nous, by means of its power, caused Simon to resemble Jesus. So some guy got crucified for him. Okay. And this other thing took the credit. Okay. Irenaeus makes the following statement concerning the cosmic sacrifice of the Christ. See, honestly, that is just, I just have a problem with that. I think that's horseshit. When the uncreated, unnamed Father saw the corruption of mankind. Okay, so it's all based on this supposition that somehow, mankind or humanity is inherently flawed, and I think that is absolute bullshit, and that is an interpolation that was put in there by the enemy of humanity, to make people feel bad, to make them feel guilty, to make them feel less than, anything and everything. Because what does a predator do? One of the first red flags is that they isolate the victim, right? And This is a great way to make people feel isolated, small and lost and alone, you know. Oh, we're just so corrupt. We need to be saved, right? I mean, it's just a mind fuck. It's a psyop. So it's hard to even read it because I really do think it's horseshit. But anyway, okay, we're going to read it. Okay. When the uncreated, unnamed Father saw the corruption of mankind, he sent his firstborn nous into the world in the form of Christ for the redemption of all who believe in him. Why can't you just believe in yourself? Anyways, out of the power of those that have fabricated the world, the demiurgus, and his 6 sons, the planetary genii, he appeared amongst men as the man, Jesus, and wrought miracles. Yeah, like I said, you know, if you actually believe that this guy ever was born, which I highly doubt. The Gnostics divided humanity into 3 parts. Those who, as savages, worshipped only the visible nature. Those who, like the Jews, worshipped the demiurgus, and lastly, themselves, or others of similar cults, including certain sects of Christians who worship nous, Christ, and the true spiritual light of the higher eons. I could go off on a rant right now, but I'm really going to try not to. Okay. After the death of Basilides, Valentinus became the leading inspiration of the Gnostic movement. He further complicated the system of Gnostic philosophy by adding infinitely to the details. He increased the number of emanations from the Great One, and then in brackets it says the Abyss, to 15 pairs, and also laid much emphasis on the Virgin Sophia, or wisdom. Does that make any fucking sense? Just a second. So Sophia, let me just scroll back here. I know I'm going to end up losing my place, but blah, 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 blah. Sophia was wisdom. Okay, yeah. Sophia was wisdom. Do you think that something that's like embodying wisdom doesn't know about getting fucked? You know, why would it be a virgin? I just have a problem. Okay. Anyways. Sorry to be crude, but seriously, you know. So he made much emphasis on the idea that Sophia was a virgin. Anyways, in the books of the Savior, parts of which are commonly known as the Pistis Sophia, may be found such material concerning this strange doctrine of eons and their strange inhabitants. James Freeman Clarke, in speaking of the doctrines of the Gnostics, says, "These doctrines, strange as they seem to us, had a wide influence in the Christian Church. Many of the theories of the ancient Gnostics, especially those concerning scientific subjects, have been substantiated by modern research. Several sects branched off from the main stem of Gnosticism, such as the Valentinians, the Ophites, in brackets it says serpent worshippers, and the Adamites. After the 3rd century, their power waned and the Gnostics practically vanished from the philosophical world. An effort was made during the Middle Ages to resurrect the principles of Gnosticism, but owing to the destruction of their records, the material necessary was just not available. Even today, there are evidences of Gnostic philosophy in the modern world, but they bear other names, and their true origin is not suspected. Many of the Gnostic concepts have actually been incorporated into the dogma of the Christian Church, and our newer interpretations of Christianity are often along the lines of Gnostic emanationism." And now here we are, we're at the top of the hour, and that concludes part 2 of the Ancient Mysteries and Secret Societies, which have influenced modern Masonic symbolism. Thank you so much for being here with me today and listening. I hope that you enjoyed yourself and that you learned some stuff, and yeah, we'll see you back here again really soon for another portion of reading together and learning together. And yeah, take care of yourselves. Have a great weekend or a great week, wherever you happen to be. And see you back here soon. And bye for now, guys. Take care. Have a good one. Bye.